trying to get you folks to understand this is how the smoke and mirrors works. I just simply want to find out what happened to the American dream as someone who is living the American nightmare. You got to know the facts. And if we came together, we could overcome the corruption that's murdering us all.
I'm just trying to make the world aware of the truth. And I've got it.
Some of you know me, many more of you don't, but I am a documentary film producer and investigative journalist, otherwise known as a muckraker. And I'm a partner in a company, and we specialize in doing deep dive documentaries on revealing truths that aren't happening in other ways because the system is insanely corrupt. Many of you know that. We see every day on Twitter basically a tidal wave of blitzkrieg of information that are going in multiple directions in 180 characters or less. Some have gotten a lot better at actually being able to string together long, cohesive sort of revelations, i.e. the Twitter files that came directly through the new owner of Twitter, Elon Musk, and of course, Matt Taibbi, who has been a magnificent journalist for over 30 years, but in a different place than he has been because of just the nature of how things are playing out in our fractured, disjointed, incredibly polarized, angry country where millions and millions of people are pointing the picture in all the wrong directions. I announced my run for the candidacy of the 2024 presidential election, which is a bit of a stunt, but it makes all the sense in the world considering what it is that I do and what I know. Ultimately, I have been dealing with the highest level law enforcement officials, particularly as it relates to financial crimes, from the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, AGs around the country, as well as former regulators that worked at such places like the Office of the Comptroller of Currency and also OTS, and within the, I already mentioned the Securities and Exchange Commission. We all know that money runs the system. That's all there is to it. We all depend on money unless you want to go live by yourself in some desert where you can erect your own home on your own property that you can defend and create your own energy, your own food, your own water for survival. Other than that, we're all dependent upon a system, and that system requires money, and that system is owned and operated by a shadow force behind the scenes that have spent decades and decades and decades of mastering the art of manipulation, which bleeds out into what is effectively monopoly. But it's an oligarchy. It's a cabal. It's a group of interests that represent different aspects of our economy that have a much more dramatic, profound influence in how things actually happen. I think there was a study about 5 years ago from some great acclaimed economists at Princeton University that proved that this government, our democracy, our so-called democracy, does not represent remotely the will of the people. But the will of the people is in a million different directions. It's shattered. All you have to do is turn on Twitter every single day and see a million different people blaming a million different entities, some of which are accurate, some of which are ridiculous. But ultimately, it's in service to this confusion. The CIA knew from its inception, and it learned this from intelligence in England, that if you can keep a country in disarray, you can keep them at each other's throats while you game the system. That's the nature in the matrix of power. It has been for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. We see it play out in commercial, production, in the mainstream and in the sort of the playing field of, culture. But because of the overwhelming, I don't mean culture so much as the culture wars is what I was trying to say. And that goes back back to the 60s, quite frankly, this newer version, everything that's kind of evolved since then. But now it's the same story, but just personified. And there's a lot of mixed messaging, and there's a lot of people going to, different sorts of camps that you would have never expected to see them in, because the enemy of my enemy is my ally and all that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, it's just mass confusion. And what I've done as the producer of the Khan, that you can find at www.thekhan.tv, which is a long form television series, investigative series that my partners and I produced over the course of years, where we pieced together the front end of the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history. There's more. I've got a whole season 2 ready to go, but I can't get it into the system because the system is owned by the machine that I'm revealing. And so it's the emperor's new clothes on really bad acid. And many of you have heard me say this over and over and over. So I'm not going to go into all of my different sorts of what we reveal or what we call the truth bombs. But I'm just going to try to get to the point of what I'm going to ask of you, the citizen of the United States. My run for the presidency is just a stunt. I don't have any chance to become the president of the United States for a lot of reasons. If you understand politics, if you understand power, if you understand money and how to get on the ballot and how to be a significant candidate, to be able to actually legitimately run for the office of the presidency of the United States, you either had to have been in government for like decades and you have to have some sort of credibility in the mainstream media to actually be heard about what your potential positions may be, in context of what's actually happening, right? That people might be frustrated with. But you'd also have to have legitimately tens of millions of dollars to be able to run for office. And that's how it works in the United States. I think we spent over $1 billion in the 2020 presidential election. And look at all of the insanity that's come from that, and we're in the midst of. What my purpose is to elevate the revelations that we spent years aggregating and millions of dollars to aggregate. But my executive producer threw in the towel because there was no market for truth, as it appears. And think about that as we're in the moment. I think it's the 10-year anniversary of the Sandy Hook shootings, and I happened to come across, a number of these children that were 10 at the time that are 17, or I guess they were 7 at the time, and they're 17 now, and they were just beautiful. They were thoughtful. They were so articulate. Their power, their truth, their experience to having survived that, to go through the gauntlet of this insanity, like Alex Jones making tens of millions of dollars a year, saying that Sandy Hook was an inside job setup. I mean, imagine that if you saw as a 7-year-old child, your classmate's head blown off. And yet you have to grow up and know that there are people out there doubting you, and then people coming to threaten your family because they're blaming you for what Alex Jones is saying, that you were part of a rigged system when you had to endure and overcome that. And somehow Alex Jones' lies became revenue in the form of tens of millions of dollars per year for insanity. That's the mark of a failed state. What happens is when the system falls like Humpty Dumpty, everybody starts going in millions of directions and nobody can trust anybody and nobody understands things. So they find solace in some scenarios with guys like Alex Jones, or quite frankly, Donald Trump, or quite frankly, Barack Obama. I say this all the time. This is the way I frame what's going on right now, because there's a lot of talk about anti-Semitism, but here's a part of that story that nobody talks about. You can't be for Israel and support Nazis. There are rich Jews in the financial system that were part and parcel to a massive criminal syndicate that are giving millions of dollars to the Trump operation through PAC money and that sort of thing, while decrying anti-Semitism. I'm sorry, you don't have any credibility if you support Nazis. You don't. And so the same goes for people that are victims of one calamity after the other. I've met so many victims of what I'm an expert in, which is the housing collapse that took place that created the great financial crisis in 2008, that buried north of 50 million Americans directly and literally over 100 million people worldwide by what was the 2008 great financial crisis, which was monumentally larger than what's on display right now with Sam Bankman-Fried and him being arrested in this crypto scenario and FTX and all of the details that I'm actually very highly involved in. But Sam Bankman-Fried literally fancied himself too big to fail. He emulated all of the elements of what created the 2008 great financial crisis, and I'm not sure if he was aware of that, because that's the way the system is run. And it sounds like it's convoluted, and it's like, if you've never worked on an engine, like, for example, I'm not a mechanic. I know how to read directions, but I couldn't go under the hood of a new car like a Tesla and figure out how to actually get it to work because of all the complicated systems that are involved. It's kind of like that, but it's all meant to basically create this polluted, murky situation that hides the ultimate truth, which is the emperor's new clothes. What I was able to do through years and years of work was to be able to prove exactly what created the 2008 great financial crisis that came from decades of deregulation and policy and all sorts of inside pull by professionals that basically gamed the system to create a trajectory for a new income. And after the 9/11 attacks, to basically stimulate the economy, and it got sorted in the housing industry. But what it was built on was a house of cards, that those on the interior basically created a roulette wheel with the middle class and the American dream. And everybody was in on it. And ultimately, it collapsed the global economy. But what we did was the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States, which is presumably mandated by Congress because it's a creation of Congress, so supposedly accountable to Congress, but it's not. The Federal Reserve is only accountable to the financial system. And the financial system, over decades, has become a criminal syndicate that uses these games. People refer to it as the casino, but they're games of roulette and all sorts of deception and inside trading and this and that, because they have access to free money. And they have for over a decade. Federal Reserve Act 13.3 pumped $29 trillion initially to save a bankrupt financial system that incorporates all of the elements of federal private equity, hedge funds, and asset managers, as well as the too big to fail institutions. It's the entire apparatus of finance, which is important to the American economy because, as we all know, capital is what fuels the economy. And what I try to tell all the people is that it's not capitalism per se, because you have to understand the difference between fire, the use of fire for warmth and heating and that sort of activity, versus arson. That's what I'm trying to convey to you. That capitalism today is predicated on what I call a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate. That's our system. And they have complete control because they pay the puppeteers to puppeteer all the fools or the tools in the fool circus, which is everybody yelling at everybody else and like, hey, it's about the immigrants, or hey, it's about the African Americans, or hey, it's the Jews, or hey, it's this or that. Meanwhile, everybody's a sucker and everybody's getting played. And the only way, and I kind of say this all the time, the only way a ship can float, or a plane can fly, or a computer can work, or the roadways to work, or subway systems, you've got to have integrity of the system. You have to have professionals who know how to fly those systems, make those systems, engineer those systems, fix those systems in the system so that it functions properly. And if you have a lot of people in the systems, particularly at the hierarchy, that are designing that system to fail because they're profiting on it, then suddenly you understand what it is I'm talking about. That's to see the forest for the trees. That's the emperor's new clothes. That's Humpty fucking Dumpty. And the country is supposed to be liberty and justice for all, predicated on separation of powers, predicated on the integrity of law, that holds power to account. We've all heard it. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Bastiat stated in the 1700s, right before the French Revolution, that when a group of men discover plunder in society, they create a legal system to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. Which means deception, okay? The greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. But I'm nobody's fool, man. I'm not their fool. I'm not their punk. I'm not their bitch. I'm not somebody who's going to cower and basically play the game of the corrupt and the wicked, because fuck that. I'm on the right side of history because I believe in liberty and justice for all and integrity. And the way the system works and flourishes is when you hold power to account, when you investigate corruption and then you throw it in prison. But getting Sam Bankman-Fried, this is a question many of you need to be asking yourself. If you are like, hey, yeah, they got Sam Bankman-Fried and arrested him for 8 counts of fraud yesterday. Why is Donald Trump breathing free air? Donald Trump has pulled more frauds than you can possibly imagine that are infinitely larger than what SBF was involved with. particularly the insurrection, but he's not in prison. And I'll be honest with you, he's a tiny piece, maybe a mid-level piece player, although he was certainly a lot more powerful as president. But on the outside, he's a mid-level player at best compared to the system that I'm revealing to you. So what I'm asking for is you to investigate who I am. Watch The Khan if you've never seen The Khan. Once again, it's www.thekhan.tv. I've got unbelievable amounts of material in a podcast we did, which is incredible, called The New Untouchables. You can do a search online for The New Untouchables, and it's right there. And also I've got on TikTok and also on YouTube what we call Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs The Khan. And most importantly, I've got what I filibustered to the American people for 10 hours, to the grand jury of the American people, on 11/1/22, and I like the symmetry of that date, and it was right before the midterms. So we did it where we had our friends go to the Federal Reserve who were victims of the financial crisis, who were the foam on the runway, who former president of the New York Federal Reserve had said to the American people that, through media, that the American people were foam on the runway for the crashing financial system, which means we're all expendable for corruption. And you're expendable as long as they keep you on your knees and you stay there. I've never stayed there. I have fought nonstop, and I know that there was at least 50 million Americans directly impacted by this. This is absolutely monumental. That led to $30 trillion in 2009, and there's been another, probably approximately 30 trillion cents pumped into the same system. Quantitative easing has been basically propping up this entire economy for the rich. And what I mean by the rich is the ultra rich, and the rich benefit from it, but you can't blame all the rich for this because they're not the ones that are in charge of it. We're talking about those above the line, those at the apex of the system, okay? It could be multinationals, they're, oil companies and finance companies and big tech companies and all of these guys that find the lobbyists to do the bidding, that are all dependent on the financial system, because you got to create debt to create growth. That's the way it works. But there's a way to do it smart, and there's a way to do it in a way that just benefits the fucking oligarchy. That is not democracy. It's a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate. So what's the point? The point is that I'm asking you, because 13 is a huge number in my life. 13 was a number that actually, in a weird way, motivated me to get this whole story. But it's all predicated on three monumental points that are relevant to what it is I'm revealing to you. There were 13 original colonies that revolted against King George III and the English Empire to create the United States of America, predicated on separation of powers and a just and equitable system based on liberty and justice for all, that we had to work through for over 246 years to get back to a point where suddenly, after all the blood and treasure and spilled through wars and all of the things that are our history that played out both in incredible ways and absolutely horrific ways, but to bring us right back to where we began, which is pure tyranny. Except in this particular case, there's not a king that is on top of everybody with his foot on their neck. These guys operate in the shadows, which again brings me to that wonderful film that I was obsessed with this last week, David O. Russell's Amsterdam, starring Margot Robbie and John David Washington and Christian Bale and many other fantastic actors, Robert De Niro. It was a Herculean film, but it reveals what it is that I'm telling you, that corruption births fascism. We've got to push back, but you can only push back with the facts when you know who did what, when, and when, and what they got away with. And that's who I am. I've got all of those answers. So I've created a campaign to purge corruption. That's what this is. Everything I do is for that. And I'd like you to donate, please, $13, no more, no less, $13 to our campaign to purge corruption, because we've got the answers. I would have already spent millions of dollars to get. But we've got to be able to utilize, we got to get your buy-in, because in this country, money is speech. There's no two ways about it. And unless we can get tens of millions of you in this situation to understand the truth, where you donate $13, then you've got skin in the game. I'm not asking for $1,000. I'm not asking for $500. I'm not asking for $1 million. I'm asking for $13 if we got 50 million people that got destroyed, by the housing collapse, that's a big fucking number, I mean, it's extraordinary what we could do. Bernie Sanders ran in 2016 basically saying Wall Street's business model is fraud. And he picked up the momentum because he was saying what Occupy Wall Street wanted at the time. They all galvanized Bernie. When he made that position, he was filling out arenas with like 20,000 people coming and donating. I think they asked for $27. He ended up raising $140 million. Now, I'm not Bernie Sanders because I haven't been in the Senate for the last 30 years. I haven't been in government my whole life. I'm a muckraker journalist. I'm an outsider. That's the only way this is going to change. An outsider who has the answers, and I have the answers. So therefore, I have it's incumbent upon me to push as hard as I can because no one else is. What we've seen from this FTX disaster, what we've seen from the insurrection and all of the different dimensions of media is that nobody has credibility that are the professionals. Mainstream media has zero credibility. I'm talking about the New York Times. I'm talking about the Washington Post. I'm talking about everybody. There's great journalists that are inside those operations. They do fantastic work, but only the work that their editors are allowing them to pursue. Nobody's allowing anyone that are professionals and those that actually are in media, they can read between the lines. They all understand that everybody in this country is dependent on Wall Street's ability to provide financial flows. Every company in this country, multinational to small group, depends on financing for growth. And if that financing is only provided to those that grow through fraud, then we've got a problem. And what is fraud? Is it shenanigans? No, it's criminal theft by deception. That's what we've seen over and over and over for the last 20 years. There is a reason for that. And it begins and ends with government. And so everything's a facade. And people, when I was growing up, they were like, the money doesn't grow on trees. Oh yeah, it does. For the rich that have got complete control. And there's ways they can hyperinflate assets to manifest this, climate, if you will, of free money in and then buy securities on the way out, all manifested by the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve is working for the new kings, the new robber barons, the new Confederacy. We're an absolute train wreck. We're a failed state. We are not the United States of America when the professionals who are responsible for the integrity of the machine to make it operate the way it's supposed to, of, for, and by the people, it's a disaster of monumental proportions. And it's only going to get worse unless millions of you support people like me in my apparatus, what we're doing. The entry point is $13. Why? The original 13 colonies came together and revolted against tyranny. That's what we have to do. You put your mark of approval and your buy-in with $13. We've got to raise tens of millions of dollars. Is it possible? Yeah, it is, because we've got all the answers. We just have to penetrate your brain. If you want to live in a corrupt society that leads to people being absolutely destroyed, whether they're Jews, whether they're blacks, whether this, they're that, this is how it goes in history. If you want to partake in that and you want to be a part of that system, you're already in it, and it's called MAGA. You worship at the altar of Donald Trump, who's a fucking fraud, and you're looking for DeSantis, and DeSantis has got plenty of problems, let me tell you, But who on the Democratic side is going to be able to step up that's made themselves clear at this stage to be able to fight monumental corruption? At the moment, no one. Bernie Sanders gives lip service, and so does Elizabeth Warren. They speak in platitudes. Elizabeth Warren knows this stuff inside and out, but she's never revealed all because she likes her safe position, and she can speak at a level where she's heard, but she doesn't make any changes because the system is the system, and she's playing by their rules, okay? It's like, for example, it drives me nuts, and it's not fair to compare Miss Warren to this because Miss Warren is, worthy of a lot of respect and admiration, but she just hasn't gone far enough. But just think about, for example, and it drives me nuts when I think about it. This is the most horrific betrayal of all time. When you have women or African-American or Jews, quite frankly, in these systems that play ball by the system's rules to destroy people that people years and years have sacrificed to get people into a position to rise to levels of power. To what? Become a part of the system of corruption? I mean, seriously, look at the Weinstein Company. Weinstein Company is my favorite production company over the course of the last 20 years because of the films that they produced. But Harvey Weinstein was a monster. And everybody that was in that system played by Harvey's rules because they were afraid that if they didn't play by his rules, they couldn't get what they wanted. And that's what guys like Harvey do. They get people to be complicit in a racket of rape. That's what this is. I've never been complicit in an apparatus of rape because that's not who I am. I am a competitor. I am a fighter. I'm a brawler, and a guy that's willing to go toe to toe with evil. In fact, I thrive on it. I want to knock evil the fuck out. That's who I am. I'm real. I've gone the distance. I've gone thousands and thousands of miles to get the right people from the FBI, the DOJ, the SEC, the Office of Thrift Supervision, the people that know how to get this right. I can deliver us the resurrection of the American dream if only you decide that the future of this nation in democracy and liberty and justice for all and the integrity of law is worth your time. Sorry, I get a little frustrated. I'm asking you for $13 and I'm pissed. But somehow we got to penetrate. I don't know what it's going to take. The truth has got to be more valuable than the sea of fucking lies that we're in the midst of. It's disgusting. It's beguiling. It's anti-American. It's antithetical to everything we are. And I guess I'll finish off with this. If you really do believe in God and God knows all, do you think God is really going to look favorably upon you when he's got a choice to let you into the gates of heaven if you've lived a lie your whole life? Hey, who am I to say? I'm not speaking for God. I'm speaking for liberty and justice for all, and that's all I can control. I would love your participation, your buy-in, and let's make this an objective. If you jump in and you provide $13 to this effort, please get 13 people to donate $13. And so on, and so on, and so on, until we reach like 10 million people. If we got literally 1 million people, we'd be able to make enough noise to get 10 million. There's always these thresholds, right? But I can tell you, there were 50 million people that were devastated by the 2008 financial crisis, many of whom never, came back. And you can't fight when you're on your heels and on your back. You can only fight when you're on your toes, equipped with the information and motivated. I'm trying to get you there. We've got to resurrect the American dream and destroy this Frankenstein of evil. I could go on and on, onwards and upwards. I just made a promise to myself that I was going to find answers.